have to talk about administrative staff, legal legislation and all that, and you're in a church. Because your sort of gut feel is that, well, we have the Holy Spirit, and so why do we need a lawyer? And the answer to that is, of course, that we're living in a fallen world. And so it is absolutely important that a church is not only applying the law, but is actually a model. Because we want to be the best practice. The worst thing that can happen to the kingdom in a modern society is that if our organisation is the one that ends up in court because the treasurer has been pilfering or there's bad practice going on. So with that in mind, before I start with the PowerPoint and the what is a trustee and all that, so should we just pray? Father Lord, we thank you for bringing us together today, and whilst we're not here to worship your name in the traditional sense of it, we are here to serve you in the best way that we possibly can. And we wish together to create an organisation which glorifies your name and sets an example in society as to what loving and community church looks like. And we ask that you would be with us today, and in my mouth and in the brains of those sitting before, to help us make that happen. In Jesus' precious name. Amen. Good. Okay, so the first thing you're going to say is, who's this dude at the front? And so, as you've already heard, I'm Craig. The second thing you're going to say is, what's his credibility to stand and tell us about how to sort out our church? And I don't really have credibility to tell you how to sort out your church. But I do have a certain amount of credibility in the charity area, and that's come about because I was in the Royal Navy for 30 years. I was involved in a number of charities as a trustee and started to find that my evening work as a trustee was more exciting than a day work as a naval officer. And so I started to decide, well, my second career will be in charity management in some way, shape or form. And so I did a postgraduate diploma in charity management and a postgraduate certificate in management in civil society. If you don't know the difference between charity and civil society, listen in, you'll find out shortly. I then left the Navy. I worked for just less than a year for the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, which is a big charity up in London, with a very interesting boss. And then I came, and I'm into my fourth year now as the CEO of Aggie Westerns, which is a Christian charity, historic Christian charity, which serves the people of the Royal Navy. And if you do nothing else to pay for me today, please take one of our little brochures so that you can see what we get up to. And by the way, I hope that is a reasonable model of how you might choose to display an impact statement as to how your charity is performing, because that's something that's very important for you. So I've been given a pretty challenging, normally I run a trustees course and it lasts a day, full day, and it's a pretty full day at that, so I've been given a fairly challenging target to fit it in before 1 o'clock. That kind of suits me because Portsmouth are playing at home this afternoon. But I'll squeeze it in as much as I can. So the first session here is an introduction to the charity sector. In the military, if you're going to have a brief about any operation or something that's coming up, the first guy who would always get up and speak to you will be somebody who's giving you the background, the environmental background, the intelligence background. What is the space into which we're going to be going to operate? Because if you don't understand that, then you can't operate correctly. And so this first 25 minutes or so is kind of about that. But before we do that, I just want to define what a trustee is. Who are the trustees here?
I have a big one.
Sorry?
Yep.
Okay, so we've got about 3 trustees here. Who are the church leaders? Right, okay, the first lesson is that is incorrect. The leaders of a charity are the trustees. Everybody else is working for them in some way, shape or form. That's the way the law works. So the people who are actually in charge are the trustees. So the second question is, are other people trustees of other charities and things?
So most of the people here is we've got a small group. We've got a small number of trustees but a large leadership.
Right, okay. So the okay, well let me just move on here. So what do we think a trustee is? This coming up is the definition that that comes out of the Charities Act. What is a trustee? In this act, so far as the context of it, charity trustees means the persons having the general control and management of a charity, which is all very well and good. Administration is a nice term, isn't it, for us to have in a Christian organisation, because administration is one of the spiritual gifts. But in terms of what it actually means, the Charity Commission didn't feel that was clear enough, so they came up with their own one. So this is out of the Charity Commission guidance, and that's quite long. So Charity Commissions do this, that and the other. But let me pull out some key words from this. Charity trustees are responsible for governing the charity, for directing how it's managed and run, and then the bottom line there is the Charities Act defines the people who have ultimate control of the charity as the charity trustees. So you can have your leadership group, charity, the trustees don't want to work in isolation, but ultimately, in legal terms, the people who bear the ultimate responsibility for the organisation are the trustees. Now, when I ask people, why did you become a trustee, not many people say, oh, it's because I didn't have enough responsibility in my other work, or in my day job, and so I just wanted a little bit more. But by taking on the trusteeship, for whatever reason, you end up with a significant additional bunch of responsibility. So, now, with that in mind, we now move on to a little bit of ancient history. Who thinks they know in history when charity was first mentioned?
In the King James?
King James. Anybody think earlier than King James?
The Geneva Bible?
Okay, so, ancient history. 3000 BC, the pyramid workers had a charity, apparently. I guess there's been hieroglyphics, maybe, I don't know how they do this, but there was apparently some form of charity there. And you can kind of see why that would have been, because workers would have come from all over Egypt to build pyramids. And I guess construction has always been a very dangerous business, so that people would have become injured if the primary member of the family who's earning money falls off the side of the pyramid during construction, then somebody's got to kind of look after them. So right back almost as far back as we have records of human behaviour, charity has kind of been a thing. And there is within the Christian world, I suppose, we think that's a Christian thing, isn't it? Christian charity, but actually no, it's deeper human. It's in our DNA to look after other people in need. So the Buddhist Emperor Asoka was one of the most ruthless dictators of, in the 1,000 years before Christ. But after he had killed off 100,000 people, he suddenly got a conscience and spent the rest of his life meditating and doing good things for people. And actually, that's his legacy, really. People remember him for all the good things that he did in his society, including some quite far-thinking things like trees and make people feel good. An early wellness program. But he funded it himself, so that was very charitable. Before Christ came along, the Jews were taught that the poor had rights and the rich had duties. That's a very charitable kind of term. And then, of course, the early Christian church was very quick to establish funds to support the needy in one way or another. And that's mentioned several times. But there's a scriptural quote from the first letter of John. If anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God love abide in him? So it should be very central to our faith, shouldn't it? A charitable edge. But of course, other religions have charity as well. Muslims were, as far as we're aware, the first people to kind of look beyond the immediate need. So yes, you have hospitals, yes, people get better, but they had funds so that they recognised when people came out of the hospital, out of care, they couldn't immediately get back to work. So hardship funds to help people through a convalescence phase was a very early trait of the Muslim faith. So that's the background, and I guess take out of that the fact that deep in the human form is a desire to do good for other people, and that's essentially what that term charity means. However, it's got a more specific meaning for us, and that more specific reason is because it's in law. So let's move a little bit closer from the world view of charity, and we'll mention that in the UK now, the reason it's in law is because it's been tied, the charitable sector and the people running the country has been tied together since quite a long time. Who do you think would have been the first one to bring charity and tax-paying money together? It's a really obvious answer.
Romans.
Sorry?
Romans.
No, it's Henry VIII.
Oh.
Because up until Henry VIII, almost all charity was run by the church. So if there's a bridge being built, the church would have built it. If your children were going to be educated, the church would have educated them. If there was a hospital, the church would have paid for it. The church did everything that effectively the government didn't do. Right up until Henry VIII decided, well, I'm going to take over the church. And so with the dissolution of the monasteries, etc., all of that stuff that the church had previously done stopped happening because the church wasn't there to do it anymore. And so Henry VIII confiscated all church properties, including the hospitals. Interesting, my dad did a PhD in road construction, history of road construction. Exactly the same thing. Construction was improving from the Romans right up into Henry VIII, and then there was a kind of 200-year hiatus when roads sort of fell into disrepair. So yes, that was Henry VIII. Now, so now all that money which was going into the charitable area from the church, it wasn't happening anymore. It was all being used by Henry VIII to fight his wars. So of course his daughter came along, and Elizabeth I was slightly more. I don't know how would you describe it. She thought differently to her father, potentially. But people still had this desire to give money. They had a desire to educate their children. They had this desire to build roads so they could connect to the next village. And so they wanted to spend money on that, but that was then eating into the tax money. So they now needed a law which said, right, okay, you are allowed to spend money on this if you want to, because that's the way the country will improve. So Elizabeth I was the first one to bring in an act, and it was the Charitable Uses Act. And she listed the number of things that you were allowed to spend your money on rather than giving it to her in tax. And so you'll see up there relief of the aged, maintenance of sick, and most of those are still relevant today. I haven't seen a charity providing for marriages of poor maids recently, but you know that could happen. And in one way, shape or form, that list has existed since 1601 right until 2019. And we'll have a look at it in a minute as to what it looks like now. But before we do that, we'll swiftly move on with our rush through the history. Charities got bigger. They were characterised through the 17th, 18th century as bigger, getting bigger and bigger, characterised by meeting the need as it presented itself rather than looking for the cause, which created the need. Jealously protecting their own areas, their own income streams. And then this fellow, Henry Soley, was sort of the father of modern charity. He came along in 1869, and he established a charity organisation society. This still exists, actually. It's the oldest charity. It's called Families Aid today, but it's got its roots back to here. He focused on taking away the requirements. So if somebody was ill, what's causing them to be ill? Let's sort out the source of the problem. Let's work together with other charities so that we can create the most efficient way of dealing with the problem. Let's speak to government to see if we can sort out the organisation of this thing from happening. So he was very much the model for a modern society. Through the late 19th century, the state started to take more and more control. In the 19th century, I think it was about 1840s, it started to take an interest in take over education. And then, of course, into the 20th century, we started having a welfare state, and which led to the National Health Service and so on. After the war, there didn't need any money, so there wasn't very much philanthropy going on, people were just surviving. But then through the 1960s, again, the charitable sector's natural desire for everybody, if you've got a little bit of spare money, you can give it to. Philanthropy started to increase again. We started bringing us up to the modern day. So I'll now shift into modern times. And by this stage, I hope you've realised, yes, charity is embedded in the human being. Yes, the state and the charity have always been close together, so legal, law, legislation, it's got hundreds of years of history behind it, but now we're going to get to the crux of where we are today. So Tony Blair, my old boss, was really big on this area, and he was big on it for an economic reason. He was fed up with, you've got left wing, which says the state should own everything, nationalise everything, minimise private ownership, because rich people are kind of bad. And then on the other side, you've got the right wing, which said the state should do absolutely nothing, the economy will look after itself, doesn't matter if you have rich businessmen because they'll create jobs for poor people, And he said, well, there's got to be another reason why people do things. There must be a way that people will do things not for money or not because they're told to do it by the state. There's got to be a reason why, there's got to be something. So that was the charitable, this is what he called the third sector. It's not run by government, and it's not private, there's something in the middle. And so he called this the third sector, and he created this thing called the Charity Compact. And the idea behind the Charity Compact was that charities could bid for government money in order to do stuff themselves. So for example, if you're running a care home, you can bid for government money in order to provide the service which the NHS would have provided had you not been there. And you can probably do it more efficiently than the NHS. And there's a really great example of this, which is the case of the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, a success story here of how the charitable sector can take on the government role and do it better than the government would have done. And at that point in the early 20th, the sort of, turn of the century, hearing aid technology had improved dramatically. Previously, hearing aid was just a microphone you put in your ear and just increase the volume. Well, you didn't have to be much more clever to realise that if you look at a spectrum, a deaf person doesn't need the whole spectrum increased. You just digitally enhance the little bits where his ears aren't working or her ears aren't working. So there's 2 million people using NHS hearing aids, all of which hadn't really changed much since the 1960s. But at the same time, if you could afford to go into a audiologist and get a digital hearing aid, then you could hear perfectly, if you could afford it. But those hearing aids were massively expensive. So what happened was people would get the NHS hearing aids because they were free, shove them in the drawer, and as soon as they could afford a digital one, which was for a lot of people, of course, never, but it was just a massive waste. So what the government did was they gave 125 million quid to the Royal National Institute for the Deaf and said, right, you sort out the hearing aids. And in fact, just sort out the hearing aid services instead of the National Health Service. 125 million pounds in government terms isn't that good, isn't that big, but in terms of the market for hearing aids across the world, it's just massive. So overnight, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf became the biggest individual purchaser of hearing aids in the whole world, and therefore were able to bring their desire, their inbuilt desire to help deaf people, their huge knowledge of what deaf people need, and a load of money and a knowledge of the industry to dominate, so suddenly the purchaser has control over the market. And as a result of that, like within about 2 years, the cost of digital hearing aids fell from over £2,000 to less than £100. And that was because of the power of the charitable sector. Now, of course, there was other things happening. Digital technology was becoming cheaper, of course it was at that time. But it happened really fast, really efficiently, because people who were doing it really gave down about it. They really, really wanted to change the world. So government said, the Institute for the Deaf has proved it's possible to combine a campaigning role with a service delivery. So their campaigning role and the government's requirement to source help for deaf people came together to create a big success story. So Tony Blair was very big on that. He created a minister for the third sector. He put one of his brightest young guys in there, a guy called Ed Miliband, by the way, history, interesting. But he was Tony Blair's guy, you know, so he really thought this was the key to making society better. Interestingly, David Cameron thought exactly the same, although he thought it for a different reason. Tony Blair's view was kind of like economic, you know, it was like a theoretical economic thing. He just thought there was this big chunk of society that needed to be improved. David Cameron felt that his heartfelt thing was that people want to help the society they live in, and somebody from outside it can't help it as quickly as people who are living in it. And so he banned the word third sector from, or the two words, banned two words of third sector from government. And he talked about civil society, or his trying to make it good on the manifesto, call it the deep society. It was a bit naff, but never mind. You could see what he was trying to do. What he was trying to do was get communities to take responsibility themselves. So if you've got deaf people in your community, it's your responsibility to look after those deaf people. It's not somebody sat in Westminster. So he kept his minister, he can minister for civil society now, I'm told, in the cabinet office right close to him, because it's very important to him. But when Theresa May came in, of course, she had other things on her mind. God bless her. And so the Minister for Civil Society, Third Sector, the charitable area, was turfed out and became part of the sports, culture and sport section. And then Bob Wilson was the name of the guy. He lost his seat at the last election, and so he's never really been replaced. So we don't actually have a minister looking after the third sector, charitable sector, right at the moment, which is a good example of I'll not get political. Right, so as we move on, fair to say then that within the government, it'll come back again, don't worry, when Brexit's been and gone, the government will start worrying about the charitable sector. Why will it? Well, here's some figures. NCVO is the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. If you need some advice and informed advice, they're always a good place to go. So, in the UK at the moment, 165,000 registered charities. Quite significant. Together, they have an income of £64 billion. That's quite a lot of money. It's quite a lot of money that the government would have to find if people weren't dipping into their pockets to provide it to. Although I say that, but actually a significant amount of that income actually comes from the public purse. 13 billion of that is from the public purse in one way, shape or another. My charity, for example, Ivy Westons, was the Royal Navy said we want some method, for an independent method for the families, military families, to get their points heard at the decision-making table. Can you create something for that, Ivy Westons? And so we said, well, yeah, we can. So we created the Naval Families Federation, NFF, it was called, Naval Families Federation. And we said, well, we can do that. It's going to need people, it's going to need money. And I said, yeah, we need it. And so, well, you give us the money, we'll create the independent organisation for you, which is what we did. So we used to get, we've made the NFF now its own independent charity. But yeah, that was a good example of the way that we were able to do something the government itself would have struggled to do, but they give us the money in order to deliver. And that happens quite a lot. But gift aid, every time you take a gift aid, that costs the Chancellor over £1 billion a year. So there's big money in there. So take it for granted that the government has an interest, even though they don't have a minister of it anymore. They're interested in what you're happening in charity, and the legislation will continue to improve and grow, and you need to be aware of that. It's not something that's just happening on the carpet, It's not the English person's view, the British person's view of charity is a nice little shop, some old ladies, selling knitted tea cosy or something, raising a few quid. This is actually big business, really, really fundamental to our society. By the way, does anybody know what the defence budget is? It's about 30 billion.
30 billion.
Yeah, just over 30 billion. So like, the charitable sector is twice as big. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? If anybody starts to earn a six-figure salary in the charitable sector. Everybody is absolutely disgraced, ripping off the hard-working donor. But actually, do you want a well-meaning amateur like, with due respect, all of us, running an organisation which is turning over 7 or 8 million pounds a year? Okay, so here's some definitions, which says, right, the third sector, we've defined that. It's not left-wing, it's not right-wing, it's not government-owned, it's not private-owned, it's something kind of in the middle. That's what the third sector is. Civil society is something a little bit wider. It's something that is just the society looking after itself in some way, shape or form. Again, it's a key part of that is voluntary use, people doing stuff just for a reason. A social enterprise is an enterprise which is part of civil society, and a social enterprise is an international term, it's not a UK term, is an organisation which is set up for some altruistic reason. May not be a charity. So, for example, if you've got a local pub and the pub is shutting down, it's not making enough money, but you think, well, actually, it's kind of a good thing for our society. It's a good thing for our community to have a local pub. So what we'll do is get a few volunteers in. We'll get some. Actually, running a pub is stretching the definition of a charity quite far. But you can see that there's a reason why that community would want to have it. I'll give you an example. But the key of a social enterprise is it's doing something in order to make money. It's itself. It's not collecting. It's not collecting things. It's not donors that are running it. And all the money they make needs to be, or at least most of the money that they're making needs to be going into delivering whatever the social enterprise was set up for. There's a good example here. What this doing is bringing the commercial sector, the power of the commercial sector, into the space of altruistic reasons. I saw a really good example of this. John Bishop, that Liverpool comedian? Yeah. So he was, you may have seen this on telly. I just thought, it's interesting, there's a social enterprise there. So he was doing a travel log around Australia. He went to a crocodile farm. And so there was this crocodile farm, and he went there and he said, well, what's this? And he said, well, we just care, we just love crocodiles. Just absolutely, and the species is becoming endangered in Australia because I think actually I've got a friend in the Smoky Mountains. He's got a guy next to him with this rattlesnake farm there. But anyway, we're going to digress. So the crocodile farm. So they went around and said, well, here's the sick crocodiles in this area here, and these are the ones we find in the wild and throw the leg. So they're all the men. They're putting them on. And then they said, well, there's not enough crocodiles in the wild, so we're creating our own. So now here's the eggs, and this is where they're fertilised, and this is the incubator, and then cute little baby crocodiles, and then these are the adolescent, and then they came to this big warehouse, and they opened it up, and they said, and here's all the crocodile skins from the crocodiles that were killed and were going to turn into handbags. And he thought, slightly old, not what I was expecting, But what they recognised was that if you just try to tell everybody that the crocodiles are wonderful, then your farmers aren't all going to agree with you. And the decades have proven that was the case. But if you can turn the crocodile into a commercial enterprise, then you actually are going to protect the species of crocodilia rather more successfully than if you just say rattle a tin, save a crocodile. So they were using the power of commerce in a social space to do good. And let's start an elephant farm in the New Forest. So in UK law, the idea of social enterprise is enshrined in company law as a community interest company, or a KIC. So a KIC is the way that we would define in the UK a social enterprise. More than 50% of its money has to be raised from commerce in some way, shape or form. More than 50% of its money has to go straight back into delivering its social need. Voluntary sector is a place where volunteers work. People think the charitable sector and the voluntary sector are the same. They're not. There's a lot of volunteers in the charitable sector. But you can have a charitable, I, for example, work in the charitable sector, but I'm salaried as the CEO of a charity, so I can't really call myself voluntary. Not for profit, you heard that term? It's kind of a US term. It's a sort of what it's come from the US, but it's sort of wider. A lot of government departments would call themselves not-for-profit, so it's a much wider connotation, but it's largely an American term. All of which is very good, but it doesn't tell you what charity is, which is what you're here for today. So what is a charity? In the law today, a charity is defined as any organisation which is set up under the law of England and Wales for solely charitable purposes. By the way, there's three laws. There's England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, all on their own laws. But clearly we're more worried about the English and Welsh one here. Is that clear? Does that answer your question? Can I go home now? So that leads you to the question to say, okay, great, thanks very much for that, but that's all, and that's all well and good. But what is a charitable purpose? Define charitable purpose for me. I said, well, okay, funny you should ask that. I've got the answer to that right here. The charitable purpose is a purpose which falls within Section 3.1 of the Charities Act 2011. Anybody sort of list that? And crucially, is for the public purpose. There's two hurdles you've got to jump before you can call yourself a charity. Section 3.1 of the Charities Act 2011 is that same list that that Elizabeth I brought in, although it's changed. But this is the granddaughter of that list. It's small. You don't need to write this down. it's scribbling away. So you've got to tick one of those things. Now you're pretty clear there. You say the advancement of religion is one of the things that you're allowed to put in there. But for some reason, for some purposes, that's actually for the next purpose, the next part of the charity definition, that can make it slightly difficult. So there's other things that a religious organisation such as us might want to include as their charitable objects. For example, the prevention of relief of poverty, massive for the Salvation Army, for example, and you've got that as one of your charitable objects. Advancement of citizenship or community development, that's a perfectly valid thing for a church to do. Relief of those in need because of their youth, ill health, a church which is looking after old people in the hospitals and stuff, perfectly valid charitable object for a religious organisation to do. And by the way, a lot more easy to prove that you're doing it than promoting the Christian faith. But nonetheless, advancement of religion is a perfectly valid reason for you to have a charity. All well and good, so we now know what Section 3.1 of the Charities Act 2011 says. But what about public benefit? Is that a straightforward term? There's more to that term than you might think at first glance. Public benefit has got two words in it. It's got public, it's got benefit. Both of those have got connotations. So, the public aspect says that you must benefit the public, or at least a sufficient section of the public, and you must not give rise to more than incidental personal benefit. So a charity which is set up, which in some way is driving an income so that the CEO, who happens to be the bloke who set it up, is doing quite well out of it. Thank you very much. It's not a good reason to set up a charity. It's got to be benefiting the public. So what does this sufficient section of the public mean? If you set up a church here, which is for Christians in Fareham, is that a big enough section of the public for you to be called a charity? Well, the answer is not hard and fast on that, but there are a number of things that will, it's called the sufficient section of the public, as you define it in your charitable objects, is referred to as the public class. And the Charity Commission is the one who will decide whether you're serving enough of the public to make it worth calling it a charity. So you need to define that very clearly at the outset in your charitable objects, but there's no set number. So the things, you might define it by geographical area, you might define it by the characteristics of people. It might be disabled people, but you'll see that in the protected characteristics there, which is the fourth one down, religion is in there. So you can define who you're supporting, who you're there for, by the people's faith. You could be there to support Christians in Fareham. Perfectly reasonable thing. But it makes you a whole heck of a lot more sellable to the Charity Commission if you're expanding outside of that in some way. So perhaps to provide a first port of call for people who are exploring their faith in Fareham. Something like that will broaden what you're doing away started a membership group. So it's got to be a sufficient section of the public, and then you have the benefit side of it. And the benefit is the purpose must be beneficial in some way, which can be proved by evidence. So this is where the whole concept of a religious charity starts to become quite difficult to prove in legal terms now, and so we need to be alert to that. How can we, and there's a whole day's workshop in this, so I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but there's a whole argument as to is just converting somebody who is atheist into a Christian a good reason for society to call you a charity? And that's becoming more and more difficult to prove. And I've got the charity sector has done a study on this, and they're working on it all the time. I've got it sitting here to give to you, and I have, but I'll find it in a minute. So the thought, the complexity of being a religious charity is one that we need to think about. Crucially, however, whatever your benefit is must outweigh the debt. It mustn't be to the detriment of anybody else. So, for example, if you are we're all of the faith here. If you're a Muslim charity and you had one of your secret things was to smuggle money into southern Syria or something, the detriment of what you're doing, the people who are being killed by the money that you're actually getting into there might outweigh the benefit that bringing people to the Muslim faith would have. So they'll be looking at that. There's other ones which are more obvious. For example, if you wanted to create a sports field, which is a perfectly charitable purpose, but in doing that you were buying up houses and wiping out the edge of the council estate, so people had to move out of the area because there wasn't any space for them anymore. The detriment of what you were trying to do would outweigh the benefit, and so the charity commission would